So Halla has come all the way. She's come a long way to get here. She actually went from Sweden back through Boston to Seattle. She says, I didn't realize it was so far away. It's her first trip to Alaska. She's here with us for only 24 hours, but we agreed that she's going to be coming back. I really hope so. And so, yeah. So right now, Halla is she's at Harvard University, and she's studying as a Louis Bacon Environmental Leadership Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And as I mentioned, she's formerly the director of the Iceland School of Energy at Reykjavik University, where she still lectures on a number of topics. Prior to joining Harvard, she's also studied political science, economics, and international trade, both at the University of Iceland and at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. And there's many other things. She's a very talented young lady. I'm really happy that you've come, and I'm really looking forward to what you have to share with us tonight. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Gwen. It's surely been the first, 8 hours of my visit have been extremely wonderful. So I'm looking forward to the few hours that I have left. But I want to thank you, Gwen, and to your team for organizing this event. It's always a pleasure to come to other places that are doing remarkable work when it comes to microgrids like Gwen is doing, and both learn and to share at the same time the lessons that we have gained in Iceland. So maybe just to start, how many of you have been to Iceland? Whoa! Big surprise. Oh, yeah. I mean, being in Iceland, not flying over doesn't really count. Okay. So I hope I'll be able to provide you with some insights that you haven't learned during your stay. But as you might have learned, Iceland is the country of the Vikings. I have sometimes people asking if this is my husband.
Is he?
No, he's in the banking industry. He dresses quite differently. But this is definitely one of our ancestors. You can see this peaceful man. I guess Icelanders are a bit like Alaskans, very independent, driven, want to get things done. And I believe it comes from our history, our heritage from the Vikings that had to leave the Nordics because they had done something wrong. Most of them were criminals escaping. Iceland is also known for its natural beauty. Here are some pictures from the southeast, which is actually my region, so I'm completely biased. I think it's the most beautiful region of Iceland. So black sand, lava beaches, and waterfalls are common in our nature. And this is where I'm from. This is my farm in the southeast. This is where I spent my youth, and this is the reason why I focus on environmental issues. I learned early on the importance of protecting your land, the importance of respecting the environment, and that is why I focus on renewable energy and environmental protection. Couple of key information about Iceland. We are a pretty healthy nation. We have low infant mortality and high life expectancy. And we have relatively high educated people. And we're one of the highest GDP per capita in the world. And it's interesting if you kind of compare Iceland to Alaska, there's quite a lot of similarities. Energy plays a big role. We're traditionally a fishing nation and so forth. The only thing I learned on the plane here, I was speaking to a family that was sitting next to me, and they were talking about the timber industry and how big of a role that had played and so forth. And I think if you look at Iceland, you see that's one of the things we don't have in common. The lack of trees is certainly something that we have in my country. It's like Alaska, it's very scarcely populated. Two-thirds of the population live in the Reykjavik city area, but the rest is kind of scattered around the island. And it's very small. 330,000 is the total population of the island. We are the big brother of the Faroe Islands or Greenland, but for the rest of the world, we're pretty small in numbers. We have this local joke that in Iceland there are more sheep than men. We eat a lot of them too. But that's not the theme or the topic that I want to talk to you about tonight. I want to talk about Iceland's energy transition and the lessons learned. Just to kind of summarize things before we start. So 99% of Iceland's electricity is produced from renewables, and 9 out of every 10 houses is heated with geothermal energy, and around 85% of the primary energy use and overall energy use comes from renewables. And the rest that is not is mainly because of our fishing fleet and because of our planes. And for the ones of you that have been, wind has great potential. But because we are an island, we're a stranded energy market, we cannot export our electricity. We haven't been developing wind as we would be if we could actually export electricity to Europe, which has actually been something that we have been looking into in recent years. This is the capital, this is Reykjavik, and again, all of the houses that you see here are powered with renewable electricity or heated with geothermal energy. But this hasn't always been the case. This is a picture of Reykjavik from around 1930, when the city was heated with coal and oil. And you can see it's a bit fewer houses, but how the smoke was looming over the city. And this is another picture which kind of shows the same angle. You can see how this was here in 1933. And then another picture, although this one is not black and white, but it gives you a perspective of how much geothermal has changed for the air quality in the capital and the villages around our country. And these, you can see here, these are geothermal wells. These are boreholes that are actually providing around hot water for around 30,000 houses in Reykjavik. And you don't really notice this in Iceland. I bet most of my friends and family, they don't really know that there are all these wells right in the capital. But that's surely the case. Where does all this geothermal energy and hydropower come from? So this is Iceland, and we're here. You can see the tectonic plates are drifting apart. So we have over 200 volcanoes on the island. So they are our geothermal resource. And then you can see all these glaciers here that are the main source for our hydropower potential. But how did this transition happen? What did we do, or what lessons kind of have we gone through in the process of changing our energy reality? Well, I want to particularly focus on the story of our geothermal. I'm going to leave hydro a bit aside. That's another story for my next visit to Alaska. But I'm going to focus particularly on our geothermal story. So Icelanders have used geothermal from as far as anyone can remember for things like laundry, for things like bathing, and so forth. But it wasn't until in the early 1900s that development or experiments on using geothermal to heat homes began. And like with many other interesting things, it was simply a farmer close to Reykjavik city that managed to heat his farm by building a system which allowed him to put hot water from a well or from a hot spring that was next to his farm and kind of take that water and build a very primitive system that allowed him to do that successfully. And there were more kind of local experiments like this. More farmers took up his example, particularly because during the war there was fuel shortage in Europe, and it was extremely expensive to heat homes with coal and oil. Then the first geothermal drilling happened in Reykjavik in 1928. You can see it here on the picture. And these first kind of boreholes gave water that was used to heat key buildings in the city, like public school and our hospital. But this entrepreneurship success soon moved into politics. And you can see here from this news site, or from this newspaper, Morgunblaðið, which is still alive in Reykjavik, that politicians had already in 1938 started to use kind of the comparison of the air quality that communities that were had geothermal, they had much cleaner air than communities that were still heated with coal and oil. So that had already become like a slogan of the elections in 1938. And many people ask me about whether Iceland was very wealthy at this time, was it easy to make this happen, and so forth. And that was absolutely not the case. This early on, Iceland was one of the poorest nations in Europe, and this was a major, major effort. And you can see here, this is taken this picture here is taken close to Reykjavik, where they're building the infrastructure to actually export the water, the hot water, from the hot springs into homes. And it was, as I said, a major effort at that time. And this is at the time that Iceland was a part of Denmark. We were a Danish colony. And I would say, kind of looking back, that this was a very brave decision to go down this path. A slight information on hydropower, because I think it's interesting, is that hydropower development in Iceland started quite similarly. It was farmers that took the first steps. So local entrepreneurship was extremely important for Iceland to kind of take on this journey. But then what? Then came the oil crisis in the 1970s because of instability in the Middle East. Oil prices peaked, and a lot of fluctuations. And as you know, when you have to import coal and oil, became extremely expensive for the local population to heat their homes. So there became an extremely strong focus on developing our local resources. And then it's the question, how is this funded? It's always, in the end of the day, it's always a question about who is paying for development. And I want to talk about, I'm on the board of, it's still alive, it's the Icelandic Energy Fund, or what is sometimes called the Icelandic Drilling Mitigation Fund. It was established in 1961 and had the role, it was a governmental fund, or is a governmental fund, that had the role to support energy developments, to fund them in Iceland. And it pretty much worked, and still works, the way that that municipalities could have loans for geothermal projects. And if the drilling for water, for hot water, failed, then the government paid the cost, or covered the cost. But at the same time, if the drilling was successful, then the municipality paid the loan back over time. And this fund became instrumental in our change. So from 1961 to 83, over 350 loans were issued, and around 20 district heating systems built all around Iceland. And today, as I said, this fund is still existing. We're still supporting municipalities that want to invest in geothermal development. And we still refund projects, failed projects. They're fewer, but we still do. And this fund has taken on new role in the society. We just finished funding infrastructure for electric cars all around the island. So now you can, or not now, but in a couple of years, you will be able to drive all around the island and on your electric car and charge it. So it's going to be kind of the ring road will be fully covered. And we now are focusing also on energy efficiency projects, changing windows in old houses and so forth that have the same goal. And yeah, I think this slide is very important and kind of shows you this visually, kind of this transition. You can see here how geothermal increased over time and how it has decreased oil consumption. Hydropower has also increased, but it's been much more kind of stable over time than geothermal. And this is a picture of Hellisheiði. So has anyone here visited Hellisheiði? Whoa, very well done. I almost never meet anyone that visits Hellisheiði. So Hellisheiði is our largest geothermal power plant. It both provides hot water for the city of Reykjavik, and it also produces electricity that is supplied into the grid. Yeah, so this is basically how we got to these figures here. And personally, I believe that we should change this figure. We really need to close the gap when it comes to electric cars, and this is not good enough. And then it's the big question. Was this worth it? 350 loans, sounds high. And you always have to look at what did you get instead. So I want to talk about economic benefits. This slide here, or this picture here, shows you it's in euros, but it gives you a great comparison. It shows you the cost of district heating in Iceland compared to many other countries, mostly in Europe. So the cost of heating has been lower for us through geothermal utilization than in most other countries, and also in the US. Although This graph here shows how much we've been saving as a part of our GDP in these different years. You can say that the saving is sometimes equivalent to 1%, and the highest it goes is up to 7%. But that's a considerable amount, particularly if you're thinking about the small size of the Icelandic economy. And this one is kind of showing the similar thing. It shows you the cost of heating homes in Iceland with coal versus the green, with oil is the green, versus the cost of heating with geothermal. And you can see how much, particularly when you have periods of time where oil prices are high, how much this means for homes in Iceland. It's very important. So additional benefits. Innovation is one of them. This is a program that is called Startup Energy Reykjavik. It's a 10 weeks business accelerator program where people can enter with their ideas in the energy industry, and they can work on developing a new business. And we can see in Iceland that because the energy industry has developed in the way it has developed, we have many more ideas and projects and companies that have kind of been born out of this development. And this is one of them. You're supposed to drink this every day. If you see this, it's a must-buy. This is a silica, which apparently makes your skin and nails amazing, and you look younger for the rest of your life. At least that's the pitch they have, and that's firmly
So you're really 60?
Yes, I am.
Is this the Blue Lagoon?
No, but there will be one picture of it a bit later on. Education and knowledge is another part. Here you can see examples of locations where Icelandic companies have been working they've been working all around the world doing consultation, participating in geothermal projects and so forth. So our transition has actually become an expert product. And it continues to be a very important part of our research, a part of our knowledge community. And at the Iceland School of Energy, where I used to work before, we had students coming from all around the world. In fact, 90% of our students came from abroad to Iceland to learn about geothermal energy, and then many of them went back home to implement projects in their own home countries. And because of that, Iceland has gained an enormous global community or global network that kind of is a gift that keeps on giving. That's why we know people like Gwen and so forth. It's a very valuable thing for our businesses and for our community. Environmental benefits. Although Iceland did not undertake its transition because of CO2 emissions, because it wanted to reduce its CO2 emissions, it was more about economics. Geothermal energy and having hydropower is, of course, saving when it comes to carbon emissions, and today that is something that is, of course, a growing value, not for Iceland, but for the rest of the world. So being able to export that knowledge to help the green energy transition is valuable not only for Iceland, but for the world. Swimming pools. I'm going to ask again, anyone been to a swimming pool? Oh, okay. So in every neighborhood in Iceland, there's a swimming pool. And this is after work, I take my daughter to one of these pools, or people meet there before work to discuss politics, to figure out solutions for the Icelandic society. You might think decisions are taken in the parliament, but this is where things actually happen. So this is, I would say, a major benefit of being able to utilize the geothermal water. It's a health issue for Icelanders. And then the Blue Lagoon. Not only is it healthy to bathe in the Blue Lagoon, but it's a key tourist attraction. And our geothermal energy industry, or the fact that we have all these geothermal lagoons, has actually helped Iceland build up its tourist industry that has dramatically increased over the last 5 or 6 years. We have now around 2 million visitors coming per year, and again, we're 330,000 people. So tourism has become a very large part of our economy. Food production. There's a lot of greenhouses. I'm not going to ask, has anyone been to a greenhouse? But we grow tomatoes, we grow a lot of vegetables and so forth. That's good for food security, that's good for our health and so forth, that's good for employment. So kind of how we use geothermal in multiple ways, for instance, to heat the ground here in these greenhouses, is another example of benefits. And then I have to point this out. If you really want a good banana, Iceland is your place to go. It's the most northern banana farming. They're very expensive, but I highly recommend it. This is a very small industry. It's actually, I think there's 5 of these clusters, but we do have them. And this is also not a major thing, but you have some locations that use geothermal to bake bread and so forth, which is more done for fun than anything else. But it's tasty. Wow. And guess what? You might think this picture was taken in Florida or somewhere else, but this is in Reykjavik. In fact, this is just, I don't know, 100 meters from Iceland School of Energy at Reykjavik University, where I used to work. It's a geothermally, we heat this bay a bit with additional geothermal water. So people can actually, it's still very cold. I don't recommend it at all. But it's something, it's our only kind of proper beach in Iceland. We very much value it. So you can see if we're focusing on geothermal, you can see like, okay, space heating is a big part of it, but there's also greenhouses, other industries like drying fish and so forth, snow melting from sideways and so forth. We use water for that too, and the swimming pool. So it's very much kind of covers our economy in so many different ways. And yes, we're pretty happy people, and I firmly believe that geothermal energy and our kind of the way that we use our geothermal is a big part of that.
So who's first and second? Always first.
I think, yeah, it's some of the other, I think it's Switzerland. We are working hard here. We have to be number one next year. So I want to kind of conclude by asking the question, was Iceland's energy transition, was it just some, local, this small island miracle, or are there some lessons for the rest of the world? Are there some lessons to share? And first of all, yes, there's geothermal everywhere, pretty much. I don't know if you know, but the largest district heating system in Europe after Iceland is actually in Paris. And there's a lot of geothermal development taking place, for instance, in Eastern Europe and so forth. And there is a lot of potential in the US in general. Different technologies apply in different places, different heat and so forth. But there's definitely a lot of potential for geothermal development in the world. If I summarize kind of some of the lessons that we learned, kind of what things that we would do differently or things that really helped us move quite fast down this path, I would say that this local empowerment, the fact that first it was easy for farmers, for the local communities to experiment, that was really the work that inspired policymakers. So it was a very much kind of bottom-up approach in Iceland, which was very helpful in our case. Establishing kind of cohesion and collaboration between municipalities, government, and the public during the early stages was very important to keep this dialogue, information sharing. What kind of community do we want to have? Very much had kind of a long-term stakeholder inclusive approach that paid off. Having a favorable legal or very important. In Iceland we have and we continue to develop a master plan. This is something that is more relevant to the situation as it is today. You can see that here is an example of different kind of power options in Iceland, both geothermal and hydropower. And it became, in the later stages of energy development in Iceland, it became very important to kind of think holistically. What are we going to develop and what are we going to preserve? Because as you know, being from Alaska, any development has an impact on landscape and so forth. So it's very important to evaluate these things carefully. And the master plan process does that. It evaluates different energy options from the perspective of culture, economical feasibility, technical feasibility, and then it categorizes different energy options in Iceland, whether it's we should develop it, whether we should preserve that region, or whether we should keep it aside and not make any decision at this moment. So that's a very important thing to do, I think, for any community, to kind of have a holistic long-term view. And then this thing, it might seem so obvious, but the fact how kind of, and here politics help in kind of showcasing success. The communities that had geothermal heating became role models in the process because people saw that air quality was just much better. And that kind of made it easier to implement new projects. So people were willing to take the financial risk, were willing to vote for geothermal because it was obvious that it was providing a better community for the villages or towns that had it. And then I think focusing on the big picture is extremely important. You cannot always be thinking about exact cost or what you're getting out of things now. You have to think about things long term. You have to think about it holistically and so forth. That's a very important takeaway. As you can see that geothermal is not only about heating houses in Iceland, it's about food production, it's about quality of life and so much more. Yeah, and then I want to end by saying that I am personally very passionate about kind of exporting Iceland's lessons and focusing and participating in developing a renewable energy powered Arctic. I think it has so much exciting potential. If you look at, it's only 4 million people living here within the Arctic Circle. There's a lot of renewable energy resources, and it is exciting to collaborate between different regions on kind of how we can actually play a leadership role in becoming like the first very green area on the planet. And again, like if you just think about Alaska and Iceland, there's so many similarities, so there must be so many lessons and so many things that we can learn from each other. And I'm excited to kind of start that journey with my first 24 hours here today. So on that, I'm going to end with a little joke that I really like. I'm a big fan. And kind of open the floor if you have any questions, and thank you for listening.
Where was Iceland getting their coal and oil?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, she's asking where was Iceland getting the coal and oil. It differed a lot in these early days where it came from Europe mostly.
So it's mostly imported.
Yeah,
Completely imported.
yeah, completely no
100%.
local. Yeah,
The only coal that's found in Iceland floats there on icebergs.
yes. There's not a lot of that. Yes.
Iceland was severely impacted in 2008 with the world economic crash. And I was there in 2010 and things were not good. And now here we are 7 years later and you're number 3 in the happiness scale. That's what I thought you were going to talk about.
That's my next talk.
Okay. But how in the world did that turn around so fast?
So did everyone hear the question? It's about how did Iceland recover so quickly from the economic downturn?
And didn't you guys decide you voted to default on your debt?
Yeah, this is, we could talk about this for hours. Well, if we kind of focus on the perspective of energy, that definitely played a role in kind of keeping the key industries that we're powering with energy in the country, so it helped with employment and so forth. And energy prices were stable in Iceland because we're only focusing on local resources. If you look at the bigger picture, it was a combination of many factors. One of them is that Iceland, we have the smallest currency in the world. So after the economic collapse, our currency depreciated a lot, so it became easier for our local industries like our fishery industry to export, and that helped our economy to grow again. Then there were agreements made with the stakeholders and debt holders that we had that helped that process and so forth. But I would love to kind of speak to you more about that afterwards, but it's such a big topic. But we have indeed recovered, but I think we were always pretty happy, even during the economic downturn. So, yeah. Yes.
You mentioned the cultural perspective, and that
Yeah.
might be a great contrast here Has Iceland always had such great cooperation and agreement among people in government? I mean, you started one of the first parliaments in the world. This is striking.
Yeah, the question is, thank you for your question. The question is, has Iceland always been so collaborative and do people always agree on things? The answer is no. What helps in Iceland to facilitate the dialogue is that we're not that big. And it's hard, I think it's harder to disagree when we're so small because people know each other and so forth. There have been, if I talked about kind of hydro developments, for instance, there have been major disagreements about whether to develop a hydro power plant site or whether not to do it. So there's definitely a lot of disagreements in the society, in politics, like in most other, there's left and right and so forth. But I would say that the small size of the community facilitates a dialogue and makes it easier for us in some ways to kind of overcome finding some middle ground. Yes?
The diagram about the cost of home heating wasn't perfectly flat. So with your use of geothermal resources, can we infer that technology, investments, and salaries for the people who work in that industry are the things that have caused an increase in, a slight increase in the cost of household
I think,
energy use? Yeah, isn't that the dark?
yeah, it's exactly, it's the variable factors. It's inflation, it's kind of cost of refinancing projects. Of course, there's some additional projects that we developed on the way that are more expensive than the low-hanging original projects. So that's the reason why it's going up a bit. Yeah.
And also, is Akureyri still oil dependent, or has it?
No, it's not. But it's developed its local resources. Akureyri is a town in the northern Iceland. Yes.
Just passed it. On the space heating,
Yeah.
I think that the power plant, geothermal, came in late enough that it was primarily the largest portion of the space heating is still water, hot water, as opposed to the electricity generation by geothermal.
Yes.
But the balance is probably shifting some as electricity in large plants come on.
So 9 out of 10 houses are directly heated with geothermal, but the rest of the houses, the 10%, 9% of these 10% are heated with electricity from hydropower. So it's like my farm. It's we're unlucky to be in one of the cold areas in Iceland, but we use hydroelectricity to heat the farm, and it comes from it's renewable energy because it's hydropower. Yeah.
If we try that here, some large corporation like the oil companies would come in and rape us. How did you avoid that?
So did you hear the question? It's about it's a question of if this would be tried here in Alaska, wouldn't the oil industry kind of intervene and try to kind of kill that development? Or take it over. That's a good question. Of course, Iceland did not have that reality. We do have potential for oil that we're exploring now. And maybe that's going to be a problem in the future. But I have to, that's maybe a good question for Gwen, whether that would happen. Yeah.
I mean, I think that one thing that I like to think about, what Iceland's done, I've worked on geothermal here in Alaska, and I think there is potential for geothermal here, but I think it's important not to get too hung up on a particular resource. Every place, every community has a different path. And I think that's kind of like what you were saying. It's not the same everywhere. Not every community is the same. Not every resource is the same.
Iceland took advantage of what they had access to, and what Fairbanks can do is not the same. So it's really more the process, and that's really why I wanted Halla to talk a little bit about that process and like what lessons they learned and how they would envision we could do things in Alaska, learning from some of those things that they've done. So. Yes.
It seems like there's a lot of upfront costs with this type of development. Where did all the money come from for that? And are there private enterprise that own something?
So the question is about how this was funded. Where did the money mainly come from? And are there private enterprises that own a part of the geothermal power plants today? So most of the projects were funded partially by the Energy Fund, which is, and at least 50% was funded, and that's governmental funding. So this process was very much driven forward by support from the national government. Today, some of the key, we don't have many geothermal power plant companies, we have 3 of them. One of them that, for instance, runs this power plant, okay. Where is this? Yep, this one here. They are strong enough now financially that they can actually invest in new power projects from their balance sheet. We only have one privately owned geothermal company in Iceland that was very controversial, and today municipality-owned geothermal power plant companies, they cannot sell the resource to, or they cannot sell the resource use to a private party. So, yes?
Yeah. I noticed there were a number of aluminum manufacturing plants there.
Yeah.
And are they owned by the government or private companies or cooperatives? Because a lot of bauxite was imported there because of the cheap electricity.
Exactly. So the question is about the aluminum industry in Iceland. Who owns the aluminum industry or the aluminum companies? So the aluminum industry entered to Iceland in different phases. And Iceland, in most cases, developed large-scale hydropower projects to provide electricity for those businesses. All of them are private companies. There's 3 different companies, in fact, 3 different aluminum companies. They have been criticized somewhat for buying Iceland's electricity at a very low cost. And today there's actually quite a lot of tension between whether we should continue selling our electricity to the aluminum sector or whether we should try to export the electricity through an interconnector or do something else with it.
Are those foreign companies or Icelandic companies?
The question is, are these Icelandic companies or foreign companies? So all of the aluminum smelters are foreign companies. So they're foreign private companies like Alcoa and these big ones.
Essentially, Iceland exports power in aluminum ingots.
Yeah, so the comment is Iceland then exporting power through aluminum, and that's exactly what we do. If we want to export our power, we always have to attract a buyer to the country and produce something that we then export as a good.
Taking a lot of water out of the ground for power and heat. Where does that water go? Is there any consequence to the discharge of that water?
That's a good question. So the question is, where does the water that we use for geothermal, where does it go after we use it? So a part of the water is re-injected into the ground, and a part of it is wastewater that goes into the ocean and so forth, ocean or rivers. But most, like for this power plant here, a big part of it is re-injected. That can have some consequences it's important to re-inject it to keep the right pressure in the system, so the system is used in a sustainable way. But there are also some, in the case of Iceland, for this very volcanic island, there have been some minor earthquakes, which we have been, this is relatively far off from where people live, which we have been researching the impact of the re-injection. Okay.
Well, one more on that water.
Yes.
So, do you know what it's doing to your groundwater? And are you ever going to run out of?
Yeah, that's, so,
That would be my concern.
so your concern would be?
Just being able to have enough water, or sustainability of the water, the groundwater.
It's a pretty wet place.
Yeah, the question is about sustainability of whether this is influencing our groundwater and the impact on our water reserves.
Yeah.
Like someone said here in the front row, Iceland is a really rainy place, so we don't have to worry so much about lacking groundwater, and these systems we're drilling and re-injecting in a way that it's not having an impact on our drinking water. And so there's no kind of consequences or worries that we need to have on that issue, basically. Yes?
The last thing I read about Iceland in the newspaper just a couple months ago was they passed some legislation concerning equal pay for equal work.
Yes?
And I was wondering, was that just a strengthening of existing laws? Was there any opposition to it? Was it necessary? And also just popped in my mind a vaguely related question. 330,000 people. I know some countries are worried about not having enough people.
Yeah.
Is Iceland, do they want their women to produce more children?
So it's a question about equal pay for equal work, a bill that was recently passed in the parliament, or put forward, or is in the parliament. It's not been passed yet, right? Yeah. It was recently put forward in the parliament that is requiring companies, if I remember right, that have 25 employees, at least 25 employees or more, to demonstrate every 5 years or so that they're paying women and men the same salaries for the same job. So Iceland ranks #1 when it comes to gender equality, and still there is a very progressive movement to make sure that in the areas where haven't made or completely closed the gap, that we're actually actively working on that. This bill was a part of kind of closing that gap, because research showed that we have some difference. People argue whether that is, right, or whether the jobs are completely the same and so forth, but in general there's mostly consensus, or there's considerable consensus that passing this legislation could be a good thing. The opposition against it has, amongst others, been that companies worry about that this is going to be too demanding for them, it's going to be too much reporting and so forth. But that's something that we will see in execution, what the consequences will be. The second question, are Icelandic women being pressured to have more kids? Not in my house. I can say, I think we have in the past had quite a high birth rate, and Icelandic family, it's at least 2 kids per family, so we have been growing as a nation. But as I said to someone here in the beginning, Icelanders like to talk about the quality, not the quantity. So we're still kind of focusing on that. So no kind of governmental, at least, incentives to have more kids. Yes?
Are you able to, so I was thinking about the electric heating, like probably for outlying properties, and like your movement that you want to like put more electric cars on. Are you able to produce electricity really cheaply, or are people just accept pretty high cost?
It's, the question is about kind of electricity costs. Are people accepting, are there high costs, and are people accepting those high costs, or are the costs actually low? And in Iceland's case, like Gwen mentioned, things are different in every context, but in in Iceland's case, large-scale hydro production and geothermal have actually been relatively cheap compared to other options. So we have benefited from those resources economically. I don't know, are we good on time?
Yeah, we have time for like maybe 2 more questions, and then, yeah.
Yes?
You kind of touched on it earlier with my earlier question, but are there any other environmental impacts from taking a thermal resource from the earth, or is it sustainable? You guys must be looking down into the future.
Yeah.
Or if you export energy, then you're going to obviously be using more of this geothermal energy.
Yeah.
And what are the environmental costs of that? What are the impacts of that as we see in fracking and tar sand development?
That's a great question. So the question is about what are the environmental impacts of a geothermal project. I think you can kind of see one of them is that it definitely has an impact on the landscape. You have to lay pipes, and it's the building and roads and so forth. And Icelanders very much care about having untouched wilderness. So location of power plants is definitely an issue that we have focused quite a lot on. About other issues, one of them is the question of you have to be able to re-inject water into the system to make sure that it's sustainable, that you're not just emptying the resource. That's one of the environmental concerns. Another one is that we're always improving is, how do we capture some of the additional gases, which is a minimal negative impact, but still kind of how can we make sure that we really capture everything additional to like sulfur or any additional chemicals that might come from the ground. But to be honest, if done correctly and if done sensibly, the CO2 emissions and the overall benefits compared to other options are override these negative impacts if done correctly, if done thoughtfully.
Are the glaciers in Iceland stable, or are they shrinking like so many other places?
Yeah, the question is, are the glaciers in Iceland stable or are they shrinking? They are shrinking. Iceland is completely losing its name. Okay. Any?
I have a quick one.
Yes?
I've noticed here that kids that are born here and grow up here and get through high school, they really want to get what we call outside to go to college rather than staying home. Do your kids want to get off the island?
Well, I don't know yet. My daughter is 5.
I didn't mean
yeah. Well, most people in Iceland leave the country to do their masters, or not most, many people do. But we have something, maybe I can say there's something in the water. There's this island factor that pulls you back. So even though most people leave, most of them eventually come back. So, but I think, is this maybe?
No, I think actually that's a really nice note to end it on, and that's one thing that I really feel, I mean, just to say this in closing, like one thing that I did feel was different between Iceland and Alaska is like how deeply the people feel connected to place there. And I think that's something that I want to see more for us here in Fairbanks and us in Alaska. I want my daughter to grow up here and raise her children here in Alaska, and I think I'm hoping that more and more we're kind of maturing, more people will stay, and of course there's people that have lived here for thousands of years, and so I think that that's one thing that's really interesting. And yeah, thank you so much for your story, Halla. Hopefully you can just stay around and we'll mingle and chat for a few minutes for those of you that are interested. And I'd really like to thank Explore Fairbanks for hosting this event, for the Worthingtons and everyone that's made this possible. Amanda, thank you for recording this with the Alaska Center for Energy and Power and the other staff here that helped set up, Stephanie Jump and Alana and Nathan. So thank you to everyone, and it's been wonderful to have you here. So I hope this is just one of many conversations. So thank you.